All right, so our last section of this chapter is going to be to talk about accident investigation data. So our two learning targets are going to be to determine the average skid distance given all or one of the skid mark lengths, and to determine the minimum skid speed using the skid mark formula. So those are the two things we'll do. We're going to chop this section up into 2 days. So this is just the first day, and then tomorrow night you'll take a look at day 2. All right, so first of all, a couple of key terms. An accident reconstructionist. This is a person who gets detailed and accurate information from witnesses and each of the parties involved in an accident. And an accident reconstructionist, they have knowledge in both crime scene investigation as well as mathematics, so they're able to take both of those talents, kind of put all of the pieces together, discuss, investigate what they learned from the people that were involved in the accident and saw the accident, and kind of come up from there with different speeds that were traveled, possibly who was at fault, and other things dealing with the accident. So that's an accident reconstructionist. Skid mark. A skid mark, if you as you're driving, if you look on the ground, sometimes you see tire marks on the ground. Those are skid marks. When the tires lock, but you keep moving, that's what causes those particular marks to get to form on the ground. So when the tire's not turning, but the car is continuing to move, that's when you end up with a skid mark. And then a shadow skid mark is just a lighter version of a skid mark when the driver first applies the brake. So it kind of at the beginning it's lighter, and then as the car keeps going, it darkens up. Anti-lock braking system. This is something that some of your cars may have it. It'll be interesting to know when you have ABS on your car, a lot of times the insurance is cheaper. So when you talk to your insurance agent or you were online looking for your insurance prices, you may have found that when they may have asked you if the car had ABS, and if so, sometimes that causes the insurance to be cheaper. But how you know if you have anti-lock brakes is right around here. Is when you try to slam on the brakes, sometimes you'll feel a pulsing vibration on the brake pedal, and basically the pedal moves up and down, so you can't really just smash the brakes like you typically could on a car that doesn't have an anti-lock braking system. And then we got a drag factor. Yesterday, or I guess really 2 days ago, when we were looking at those different reaction distances and stopping distances, so on and so forth, we did everything with a perfect situation. Well, while we're doing our calculations today, our drag factor, what that did, that's the pull of the road on the tires. So that's going to be different based on if you're driving on cement, asphalt, gravel, snow, or ice. So obviously, if you're driving on cement, then those conditions are a lot better than driving on ice. So that's why you can see here that the drag factor on cement is between 0.55 and 1.2 versus on ice, you're looking at 0.10 to 0.25. So your drag factor, that's the pull of the road on the tires, and it's a number that represents the amount of friction that the road surface contributes when driving. And then the last thing that in terms of key terms are yaw marks. We'll deal with this more in day 2 of 5.9, but those are basically skid marks. But if you've noticed, you'll notice some of them are curved, and if you look here, this one represents a yaw mark because of the curvature, versus this one here that's going straight, that's more of a skid mark. All right, so when the car is slipping sideways, but at the same time continuing to go forward, you end up with a yaw mark. All right, and then braking efficiency and skid distance. This is the one calculation that we'll have, our skid distances. That's what we're going to calculate in this section. And then your braking efficiency, this is determined by an examination of both the rear and front wheel brakes. And so if your brakes are completely non-existent, you got a 0% efficiency. If you have perfect brakes, then we'll say that your braking efficiency is 100%. And when we plug that into the formula, we always use it as a decimal. So if it's 100%, we would use 1, and then at 0%, it would be 0. Whoa. All right, so let's look at the skid speed formula. Again, this is one of those formulas that I'll have on one of the big post-it notes. I think right now it's above my desk. But the skid speed formula, S equals the square root of 30 times D times F times N. In this formula, S is representing the speed that the car is traveling when you actually start your skid. So what you'll see in some of the examples is that the speed you were traveling can actually be calculated based on these other variables. So sometimes when you may be watching the news and it may say that an accident occurred and somebody was traveling 70 miles per hour, where they're able to determine that because of these other things that are in the formula. So that's what the S represents. 30 is just a constant. It will always be in our formula. D, that's your skid distance. F is the drag factor that we talked about based on the surface that you're driving on. And then N is the braking efficiency. All right, so those are our 4 different variables. So when we look at this, we'll say that our speed equals the square root of 30 times D times F times N. All right, let's look at a few examples. So Ron, well, I'll let you read that. So go ahead and take a second to read it. You may need to pause your screen. All right, so in this example, when they measured the skid marks, they noticed that there were 4 different lengths. Well, actually 2 were the same, and then the other 2 were the same, but we have 55, 55, 62, and 62. So if you recall from the definition of skid mark, when we do this, because there's 4, we're going to take the average of them. If there's 2, 3, or 4 skid marks, we'll take the average if they're different lengths. If there's only 1, that's what an accident reconstructionist would use for the length. So in this case, what we would want to do is find the average. So we're going to take 55 plus 55 plus 62 plus 62 and divide that all by 4. And so when we find the average of this, the skid distance that will be used when calculating this skid speed formula would be 58.5 feet. All right, so it's as simple as that. Since there's 4 different measurements, or 4 total measurements, we'll add the 4 numbers up and then divide by 4. All right, go ahead and take a second to read that. So now in this case, there's only 3 actual measurements for the skid marks. So again, since they're different measurements, what we got to do is go ahead and find that average. So we're going to take 35 plus 38 plus 47. Since there's only 3, we're going to divide that by 3. When you punch that in the calculator, I did that already, you end up with 36.67 if we round that out to the nearest hundredth. So in this case, the skid distance would be 36.67 feet. All right, so simple calculations there. If there's 1 measurement, you use it. If there's 2, take the average of the 2. If there's 3 or 4, just like with the 2, you would take the average of them. All right, here's a more detailed question here, and in this one now, we're going to find the minimum speed. So we're going to have to use our skid speed formula. So go ahead and take a moment to read that. All right, so as we go through all of this, we'll see that we get our drag factor of 0.78. Brakes were operating at a 100% efficiency, and the skid marks were each 80 feet in length. So if we substitute in for the variables we know, S is our unknown, so we're going to have S equals the square root of 30 times. When we talk about our skid distance, they were all 80 feet, so that means the average would be 80. So we would use that. Our drag factor is 0.78, and then our brake efficiency is 100%, so we would just use 1. So when we go through and calculate that, what we would do when we take the square root of that product, we're going to end up with 43.3 miles per hour, because it's asking us to round to the nearest 10. So what you would find is it says the speed limit on this portion of the road is 35 miles per hour. So this cat was obviously traveling above the speed limit. So in a case like this, when they come up with the calculations, this driver would be given a ticket at the scene of the accident, because it's been determined that he was a minimum of 8 miles per hour above the speed limit. All right, go ahead and try this one on your own. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the actual work or the process here with the answer. We're going to call this your homework. So what you need to do is answer this on a half a sheet of paper, and when you get to class tomorrow, I have a box on my desk for you to set your answer in on a half a sheet of paper. And what I'll do is, at the end of the day after 9th period, I'll draw 1 name with the correct answer, or 1 paper, and whoever I draw, I'll get a $10 iTunes gift card. So if somebody didn't watch this video, you probably don't want to tell them about it, because you're decreasing your chances of winning. So once you get to class, take that half sheet of paper, set it in the box, and then at the end of the day, I will pick out a winner. All right, so let's keep going. Go ahead, take a second to read this one. All right, so we got our formula on here. So now in this one, it's asking to the nearest tenth of a foot, what would you expect the average length of the skid marks to be? All right, so that kind of changes which variable we're looking for. So now in this case, our unknown is the D. So let's substitute in for everything else. So her speed was obviously 50 equals the square root of, our 30 is just a constant, so we'll throw that 30 in, times the drag factor was 1.2, times our braking efficiency, which is 90%, so we're going to use 0.9, times our unknown, which is the capital D. So when we go through and solve this one, all right, let's go ahead and simplify by multiplying what's in the parentheses, or I'm sorry, what's under the radical. So when we simplify what's underneath the radical, we're going to get 50 equals the square root of 32.4D. So now to solve here, we're trying to solve for D. The next thing we need to do is get rid of that radical. So to get rid of the square root, we've got to take the square of both sides. So if I square the left and the right side of the equation, on the left I'm going to end up with 2500 equals, and basically the radical and the squared cancel one another out, and we get 32.4D over on the right side. And then if we divide both sides now by that 32.4 so that we can isolate the variable, if you punch that into your calculator, those will cancel. You end up with D equals 77.2 feet, since the question asks for us to round it to the nearest tenth. Alright, so based on that we get 77.2. And so what you can see is with all of these questions, really you can be given any three of the four variables and solve for the other, just keeping in mind that 30 is a constant and that will always appear in all of our examples. Alright, so that's it for the first part of 5.9. Tomorrow, please be sure two things. One, make sure you do that on your own question. Have it already written out prior to class starting on a half a sheet of paper. You can use a full sheet if you want. You can use a sticky note, whatever, as long as I can see some work. You're going to drop it in the bucket that I have on my desk before the bell rings. Those will be the only ones that will be eligible to win the $10 iTunes gift card. If you don't have an iPhone or anything like that, then we'll discuss something else, maybe a $10 gift card to a restaurant so that you can go out, Subway or something like that, so you can go out to lunch. So that's the first thing. The second thing is bring your workbooks tomorrow. I'm going to give the in-class assignment to be out of your workbook, and you'll just rip it out and turn it in to me before you go. All right, so that's all. Feel free to go ahead and watch day 2 of 5.9 if you want to, but that'll be your homework for tomorrow night.